Hello and welcome. For those that are joining us today, thank you very much for tuning in. And for those that are watching on demand, it's good that you're watching this, and I hope you find the content of today's session a useful one. So let's get started. Quickly, I'm Rich Vibert. I'm CEO of Metomic. Metomic is a human-centric DLP tool for SaaS applications. Today, we're here to talk about a guide to implementing modern DLP. So we're going to come on to how that relates to this human-centric element that I just referred to, a modern DLP program that actually works. So a super interesting topic. And to discuss this, I've got Mike Ivey from Modern Health. Mike, you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. My name is Michael Ivey. I'm a staff security engineer at Modern Health, and we are a mental health tech startup providing mental health services to individuals and businesses.
Cool. And Mike, how big is Modern Health? You US based? How many employees? A little bit of the demographics of the company.
Yeah, I want to say we have about 300 employees, and we're all over the US.
SaaS users, I assume?
Yes.
Favorite SaaS tools?
Favorite? Oh, that's tough.
What are your favorite SaaS tools?
Metomic.
Cheers, Mike. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about some of this today. So what we're going to cover today's session is the evolution of DLP. We're going to talk a bit about governance, people, processes. We're going to talk about policies, rules, how they relate to the world of SaaS, compliance and regulatory adherence. And then we're going to finish off by answering any questions that we have coming through. So if you've got any questions, please do post them, and we'll get to them at the end of today's session. So let's jump right in. Mike, let's start. When we talk about data protection strategies today, there's obviously quite a lot of uncertainty around whether they're truly effective or not. What do you think are the most common misconceptions that businesses and professionals, executives have about DLP programs?
With DLP, some of the misconceptions, there's just a lot of alerts that you can get from these tools, and how actionable all those alerts, how useful all those tools, and what's the real benefit of something like that. So you got to make sure that you sell it well, that they understand like how this fits into your data strategy, data security strategy, so that they can actually see the value. And when you get it set up right and it's working, it works.
Yeah. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about like where did DLP start? Like, because obviously, there's now, there's AI, there's SaaS, there's cloud, there's email. Like, what was sort of the origination of DLP, at least from your experience?
Oh yeah. When I think about DLP, take it way back. You've had like network DLP, you had host-based DLP. Now you have SaaS DLP. And you'll have some rules that you're monitoring for different things. You're monitoring for file types, or you're monitoring for like content, and trying to prevent that content from leaking out of your organization. People who should not have access, getting access to that data. And so, it's over the years, starting out with just rules. They sprinkled in some AI to machine learning to, where you can train and look for behavioral things. And now you're like merging all of that together, and we've got AI adding on to it. So, a lot has changed in DLP.
Right. Yeah. Like for example, my first experience of DLP was as an employee, as a user that tried to send an email. In fact, it was a false positive. So I wasn't trying to get anything out of the business, but my email would be blocked. Right. So existing DLP is very much like, when you look at things like email, it's typically more simple. It's like prevent an email being shared if it contains certain sensitive data. But when we look at things like SaaS, there's different ways to get data out of an organization, right? You can share stuff publicly, externally, you can send stuff via email. It's more flavorsome now in terms of the ways that you can get data outside of a business, right?
Yes, so many ways.
And then so this is why, like, when we think about, you talked about some noise and alert fatigue. Do you think, why is alert fatigue more prevalent in SaaS applications?
You have a lot of people, a lot of things happening. There's a lot to tune. You have to tune your alerts. You have to make sure that you're building policies and understanding what's there. So you're not just alerting on everything. So, you know, out of order here, but, you know, knowing what's in that environment, knowing what needs to be protected, and putting the right policies in place to alert you on the things that you need to respond to, versus just turning on everything and, you know, getting flooded with a bunch of alerts and not knowing what's critical or what's not.
Right. And maybe could you share, Mike, for us like just an example policy? Maybe we don't need to go into the intricacies of all the finer details, but just like broadly, what would a policy look like for a company like Modern Health?
For policy, for our company, dealing with the data, or the data that we deal with. So, you know, we have health information, we have PII, we have employee information that we want to protect. And we've got a foundational like structure on where data is stored. So we can build policies that are focused around those buckets. So segmentation is important, but we can build policies around those buckets and restrict access to that data based on its sensitivity level. And we try to, you know, if we find a place where there is some commingling of different sensitivity level files, separate those so that we can put the most restrictive on the most restrictive files. And not everything needs to be secured at the same level. So you want to make sure that you are doing the work to lay down a good foundation. If you didn't start that way, you can go back, fix it up, and segment things right so that you can build policies that are focused and will alert you on things that are truly important.
Right. Okay. So you're obviously you're trying to balance. You obviously don't want to close down and block all types of sensitive data sharing. So you're trying to balance some element of productivity in there, I assume.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And how do you talk about another element of balance? How does Modern Health approach the balance of security alerts with actual threats? Because I think we can. I mean, maybe I can ask you. We both agree there's always going to be some false positives. There's always going to be some noise. How do you find that balance to make sure that when you get alerts or when policies take automated actions like preventing data sharing, how do you make sure that you've got that locked down to only taking effect when there are actual threats in motion?
Yeah, there's a number of things that we've done with, like I mentioned, tuning our policy. So you set it up and you start to get a baseline, get an idea of what sort of things are alerting. And over time, you tune your policies so that you can cut down on some of those alerts. You'll see a lot of false positives, or you'll see, a lot, maybe some false positives. And so you'll tune your alerts down. And you'll also recognize, okay, some of the files and where they're alerting from, maybe things need to be moved around. Who are the teams that are triggering a lot of the alerts? You know, we do have files that need to be shared publicly, and they're shared in Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, whatever. You can just share a file, and that can get really messy because you can have a file next to sensitive files, and it's not sensitive. You know, it's a public file, but then it's shared. So now you have a person or people with access to these files, and that can create a lot of alerts. And you can't put a policy around, let's just say, the folder. You have to do it at the individual file level, and there's too many files for that. So getting really good about keeping things separate. And if, like I said, if they're not separate already, you might want to rethink your strategy and start there. Start with a good foundation of moving things into the right buckets.
And then, so I assume a lot of the starting point is getting visibility, right? It's understanding where sensitive data is. Is it in particular folders, like only certain folders, certain files? Like, tell us about that. Like, surely visibility is the beginning part of a lot of DLP programs.
Oh, yes. Especially with privacy laws and needing to be able to fulfill certain requests. We've got a number of tools that help us with data discovery, classification across our SaaS applications. Our DLP solution is a part of that strategy. So it's not only doing the discovery and classification for us, it's also alerting us. And so, you know, you got to know what's out there. You got to know where your data is stored. And, you know, with your strategy, that's the first step, as you mentioned. Slack. Who knew that Slack is another file storage? People upload files all the time. You want to scan Slack. And you're inviting people into your Slack organization that can access these sensitive files if they're just being dropped in public channels. So you want to know where your data is stored. Do that discovery first. Once you figure out where it's stored, find a tool that can integrate with all those different data sources so that you can, you know, create policies and scan.
So a couple of things there. So firstly, you've got different sort of processes and tools in place. One to do more of the focused data discovery, maybe governance and classification. And then you've obviously got a separate set or chosen tools to do more of the DLP approach. There's obviously an overlap in the middle of them, but you are sort of separating out those two things.
Yes, we are.
Okay, and you're right with Slack. I mean, if you look at Slack now, have released like Slack, I think it's called Slack Canvases. So it's not even just messages now, it's almost become like a blend of Notion. So you're right, everything, all of these SaaS tools are becoming blended into file storage and messaging and collaboration all in one thing. So there's all these hidden corners of SaaS that you would never be able to search for sensitive data in those manually. So you need some sort of tool to get there, right?
Oh, yes.
Let's go back. So we're talking about DLP, talked about how DLP's evolved. What do you think? I mean, me and you are obviously relatively biased, but for the need of DLP, what's the business driver for DLP? Why does a company like Modern Health, in terms of the company, why do they care about this?
That's a good question. There is the security standpoint of just wanting a part of your data security strategy. And this is a control you can implement that will help you protect your data. There's also standards, laws, regulations. So for us, HIPAA is more about the data security part. So how do we fulfill the data security requirements there? How do we monitor and make sure that only people that need access have access to the information, and we're protecting it from unauthorized access? How do we remediate if something does happen? And then, with the privacy laws, making sure that we protect that data. And again, only people that have access or need access have access to it. And we're able to take automated actions to remediate things if someone does get access. So, the driver depends on, if you're in an industry that's highly regulated, and if you're not, still just it's a security best practice to, continually improve your data security program.
Right, exactly. And you talked about automation there. Is DLP for you, if you talk about generally like data loss prevention, right? So preventing data leaking outside of your organization, I imagine it's more than just automated tools. Is there an element of like education outside of these tools, like doing training and awareness? Like, how do you, if you think about the wider picture of preventing data leaking via SaaS tools, what elements are in there beyond just the automation with tools like Metomic?
Oh, yeah. Good point. Good question. Security awareness is important. We do training for phishing, and, we do training for how to handle the data. We have our policies and standards that all employees must know or be aware of, and so that they can, enforce those security controls. And so we use a tool like Metomic or any DLP solution, any good DLP solution will help you to educate your folks. So you have not only the remediation happening, but you have a banner or something that pops up and says, hey, this file has PI or PHI in it, and you're sharing it into a public channel. Reach out to your security team. We use that a lot within Modern Health to educate our folks. They may not know that they're dropping a file in a Google Drive folder that external users have access to. So we use that to educate them. And then they reach out to us, and we start communication. We work with them to figure out what they're trying to do and make sure they're able to do what they need to.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And that ties into some of the latest features that we've released in Metomic. We call it this human firewall element. So for example, let's talk about that Slack example. You drop a file in maybe a Slack Connect channel, which there's like external people that have access to. That file contains sensitive data. With Metomic, you can do things like, rather than deleting the file, automating messages to the employees straight away to say, hey, you just dropped a file that contains sensitive data into Slack Connect. Are you sure you wanted to do that? And then the employee can take direct action via the Slack message. They don't have to go and find the previous message and so on. So we're really big believers in this as well, right? Enabling the employees themselves to remediate their own risk. And a big reason for that is, as you know, it goes back to the noise, right? I don't think you, Michael, could spend all day sitting there triaging alerts and addressing alerts yourselves. You have to look to employees, right, at this sort of scale.
Oh yes, we definitely need help.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to be too busy. Yeah. Okay. So on the business, we talked about the business drivers. Maybe you could walk us through some of the key. So we get a lot of questions about, obviously, security professionals, compliance professionals. To them, they know that DLP is important. And some companies, it sounds like Modern Health, they've obviously got a great culture in thinking about this. And that might be because you're in a regulated industry. But for those that aren't, maybe it's more difficult to get to get the business buy-in, right? The executive buy-in. Could you
Yeah.
walk us through, if any, that like any key challenges you faced when implementing DLP, both from a decision standpoint and then an onboarding standpoint, and how you overcame those challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I am fortunate that I've been at places where it wasn't a hard sell.
Yeah.
It was, you know, we've got our roadmap and we're continually improving on our security program. And so this came at a later stage, but you know, it was an important next step for us to make sure that, you know, we don't end up in the news, or if we do, hopefully we've got a good process in place for detecting and responding quickly. But you know, that was what we used to somewhat well, because we were regulated in a regulated industry, that helped sell it. I've been at places before and know a lot of folks who are in industries that aren't regulated. I know like the well, just having to think about, okay, how do we protect this data from being leaked, and what controls do we have in place? What do we have foundationally? You know, making sure that we've got strong passwords, making sure that we're only giving access to people that need access. How can we improve this a bit more and protect our business, protect the brand, protect the reputation that it will happen if your data is leaked? And what tool can we use to help in this? SaaS has opened up a new world for a lot of people. The data or DLP tools that existed before, where it's just like on your system or for your network, they don't help in this situation. You have people all over. And so you want to make sure that you find the right tool that's going to help you in your environment. And DLP is a great tool.
And why, if you get down, because you talk like people, you can put all the controls in place to make sure that only the right people can get into these tools, right? Notion, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, and so on. Why is that not enough? Even if you've got all of that locked down, you only got employees in there. Why is it still not enough to protect the sensitive data?
It's not enough for multiple reasons. People make mistakes. You have malicious actors that are looking to get in. They're going to try to figure out how to get in. You know, you need a layered approach to security. And so that way, if one thing fails, hopefully that next thing will pick it up or do something in some way. And so a part of the strategy should be to have many things that's going to help you to ensure that the data is secure. Not only strong authentication or logging, but alerting, detection, monitoring, alert you, but also take action if possible. If you can, you know, build policies because you're confident, like if this scenario ever happens, this should not, so block it. And then if you don't know, alert somebody so that they can respond to it. And so if you just go off of just, you know, one control, for example, when it fails, because it will, you've just lost. But if you add layers of controls, then you can lose some. Hopefully you get alerted. Hopefully something takes action for you, just to help you ensure that that data is secure.
That's super interesting. So you're saying you've got the layered approach. One, you're obviously doing general training to employees to make sure they're aware of the security risks and what to do. You then got a layer of making sure only the people have the right access, so like the authentication layer. And then within that, you've got layers of making sure that sensitive data doesn't leak. You mentioned blocking. Is blocking a last resort for you? Would you rather the notifications to the employees, maybe the alerts to the security team, or do you actually have like policies live that are blocking certain stuff straight out the gate?
Yes. So going back to what I mentioned earlier about separation and how critical that is, you know, if you know that no files or folders in this drive should ever be shared publicly, you know, at that point at the Google level, we actually block it. So no one can even share from there. And we don't have to create the policies there for that. We can create policies for other things. So it takes some of the burden off of creating more things, more rules in the DLP solution. But then we have maybe an external drive, a drive that we know things will be shared out of, and we can tailor our rules for that. So we block at the, you know, if we can, based on our how we've designed our drives, so we can restrict access that way. And then, you know, we have to deal with the ones that aren't that easy to
Interesting. And because we talk about blocking, but for example, there's different flavors inside different applications. In Slack, you can do things like redact a message. In Google Drive, you can do things like delete files, but you can also do things like change the access levels. Is there any other types of like, we call in Metomic, we call these actions. You create a workflow, says like, if this certain activity happens, take this action. What types of actions are you seeing? Redaction, access levels, is there anything else?
So those are the big ones. You know, not redaction, the like removing of permissions. If someone puts a file in a or shares it out and it's flagged as having PHI, then we just remove those permissions and notify them. Redacting, we haven't done much with that yet, just because like the use case for it, instead of redacting, we've just removed access. And that could be like the next, you know, getting to a point where you know enough where you can just redact because you know that it should be it can be in that channel or in that drive, and those folks can see like, you know, this information, but just remove what they can't, what they shouldn't be able to see.
And the you meant that's interesting. So you would have some policies that are changing access levels and at the same time notifying the person that shared the file. Why do you send that notification?
Got to make sure they know what just happened. You don't want upset or frustrated users when they try to share a file and it gets unshared and there's no like notification. So, but not only that, we don't want to, you know, make anyone upset. We also want to make sure we educate folks. So this is why the file was, you know, marked as private again. And here's what you need to do. We have information to give them guidance on how to reach out to us and figure out the next steps.
Okay. So talking about the policies, this automation element of it, obviously the automation is a big part of it. We talked before about, well, you mentioned PHI. So you've obviously got policies that are acting differently depending on the different types of data. Are you just looking at PHI or do you have any other forms of classification that you're using in DLP or just otherwise like data that you're classifying?
Yes, good question. We're looking at PHI, sensitive information. Sensitive. So you've got credentials, keys, you've got API tokens, names, email addresses, just anything that could be sensitive, especially in bulk. But yeah, we're looking at, we have different groups. These groups are created. So there's like a health information group that has all the health related things, looking at different like ICD codes. And we've got the personal information. And even with the personal information, we've got different personal information groups because in our policy, we're looking for those groups and PHI, some combination of those things. And we separated them that way so that, you know, we can find those different cases. There's a lot of and ors in the, you know, policy that you're creating. So, and then the same thing with secrets are a little bit easier. It's just if you see a secret somewhere that it shouldn't be, let us know. If we were monitoring the place, a secret shouldn't be there. So we get an alert, we can respond to that.
So it's interesting, right? Because this shows like the evolution of DLP. It's not as simple as like, if we see a credit card number, don't let the email be shared. You seem to be looking at kind of complicated queries of like, if some like names and addresses are shared in the same area, because it's interesting in like a Google Sheet, for example, it's there can be very big Google Sheets. So you might have some name somewhere, some ICD code somewhere else. So you've got to combine these things to classify it. And then you've got different policies acting on different groupings. So some of it may do redaction, some of it may do notification. So it's not just one DLP policy, right? It's a collection of many.
Right.
Interesting. Okay, see how much it's changed so much. Now, Modern Health, obviously, healthcare company. We talked about the regulation, kind of a heavily regulated industry. Compliance and regulations is top of mind for many businesses. A, because it's incredibly important to get right. B, it's a complicated world out there when it comes to different regulations. How has implementing a modern DLP program at Modern Health helped you meet these regulations? And what advice would you give to others getting to and maintaining compliance?
Yeah, good question. It's helped in multiple ways. You know, you got the regulation side of it. You've got our customers who are also, most of them, regulated, and they want to make sure that their vendors are doing the right things, are compliant and secure. So having DLP as a part of our strategy gives us another thing to show our commitment to making sure that their data is secure. And these are the things that we're doing to build up our program, to maintain our program and continue growing it. So, implementing the DLP strategy, actually, it's fed in more to the data privacy things that have come up and data discovery and being able to use that to feed into the discovery and classification tools there, having another tool that can help us there. But yeah, when it comes audit time, we're able to use the output of the alerts that we get from our DLP solution as evidence. And like I said, just for our customers, knowing that when we get questionnaires, they ask, hey, do you have DLP? And we're able to say, yes, we have it. Not only do we have it, this is how it works. This is how it's integrated into our data security strategy. So yeah, it helps. And then there's overlap, of course, with whether it's HIPAA or some privacy law or anything else. They have similar controls that require protecting data and the controls around it. So it helps us meet those controls.
Okay, so you've got like audits, you've got customers, just like you've got your customers that want to make sure that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And is there anything with tools like Metomic, so DLP tools like Metomic, how are you evidencing this? Are you just saying, we use these tools? Are you producing reports to show the policies that are in place? Like, what actually evidence is typically required from these auditors and customers?
Yeah. So we have alerts and how we've managed those alerts that have come in. We can generate reports. We have generated reports and shared those reports when they say, hey, give us an example of some alerts that you received and show us the process that you worked through to remediate that finding. So, we can use a number of different ways, whether it's just taking actual individual alerts or getting a report and sharing that report to the auditors.
Okay, good to know. I'd love to discuss the importance of managing stale data. We've talked about, again, it goes back to the beginning, the evolution of DLP. And at least when I why I started Metomic, when I thought about SaaS applications, I think the big difference with SaaS applications to maybe some existing things that are in place or just tools that we've been using in the modern workspace, SaaS is quite transactional, especially when you think about things like Slack, for example, like messaging platforms, Slack and Teams. I message you now. It's unlikely the message will be needed in 5 years' time. Same for the likes of Google Drive and file storage. Files, not all files have a lifespan, but some of them certainly do, right? They're not needed over a certain period of time. So how do you think about that? Like, do you stale data, like, do you agree with that? Do you think that most data probably does go stale at some point? And how does that sort of lead into your strategy to making sure that data is not leaked outside the organization?
Yeah, definitely. So data retention and having a data retention policy that you enforce. You don't need to keep data forever. It's got a lifespan on it. Yeah. So making sure that data, when it's not needed anymore, you get rid of it. And because if you're holding on to it, that's just risk that you're carrying. Yeah. So depending on your strategy of like keeping things separated, maybe it's like labeled and archived somewhere. You're still monitoring that archive. You don't want to see someone accessing it that doesn't need to access it. That's kind of a privileged action to be able to restore some archived data. But you could definitely use your DLP tool there to just continue to monitor those things until they're gone. Yeah. And make sure that only the folks that need to have access, there's some critical thing that happened where you need to recover, or not recover, but just access that data that's no longer actively needed. And you can use the tool to help you just stay on top of it, monitor, and make sure that access is still limited and protected.
Yes. Okay. So there's ages like the data itself, so archiving or deleting the data itself, but there's also making sure only certain people have access. You talked before, right, about certain areas of the likes of Google Drive. So have you got policies in place that are preventing oversharing of sensitive data outside the organization? And do you do anything similar regarding internal, your 300 employees? Do you control a tool who can see data internally as well?
Yes, we do. I'm sorry. Repeat that one more time.
I'm saying, like, we're talking about external, like, access management, and obviously there's data getting outside the organization, which is very much the basis of of DLP. But even internally, when you're 300 people, probably not all sensitive data needs to be accessible by every person.
Yes. Okay. Wanted to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah.
Definitely. We have separations for different organizational units, different teams, the way that they go about getting access. We have a whole process for that. But yeah, not every person, not every team needs to see all the data. And there have been some interesting cases where there's collaboration between teams and they need to access similar data. So going back to just the way that we organize things in our storage, cloud storage, to make sure that we enable the right folks to get access to what they need so they can work, together seamlessly. And we use our DLP tools there to monitor, why is an IT person, in finance, that one's a little probably more false positive there because sometimes they help them out. But why is a marketing person accessing files in a finance bucket? That unless they have a business justification and it's been approved, then they shouldn't have access to that. So yeah, we definitely monitor for those sorts of things.
Okay, cool. And then obviously there's an external element. So data being shared externally has got its own sort of policy enforcement, probably tighter controls if you want to get data outside the organization, e.g. via sharing a file in Google Drive.
Yes.
It's probably got its own policy automation in place, right?
Yeah, we monitor for any sharing outside, sending of emails, all of that.
Okay, yeah, because that's so again, it's like this is so flavorsome, the DLP, whereas when you look at other types of DLP, it can be a little bit more one size fits all. In SaaS, it gets super granular, and then you've got to balance this noise that we talked about before. Talking about that, the other thing I wanted to cover was, because I've been noticing if you've been speaking, right, you've got, especially in a regulated industry like the one you're in, you talked about ICD codes, you talked about different types of data, we talked about external versus internal. It seems to be, and we talked about visibility as well. So granular filtering, like finding the risks that matter, is key to focus, is key to putting a right DLP program in place, right? Tell us a little bit more about how Modern Health uses these granular type filtering to prioritize the most important risks and threats.
Yeah, that's good. We understanding, you talked about visibility, we talked about visibility and understanding what you have and what's important to the business. So making sure we've gone back and our policies and the DLP solution have been changed so much. There's even been like new functionality added to make some of the logic that we create more flexible. So, we've gone through creating or pulling in group information so that we can build policies based on groups doing things, build policies based on the folder in which the files are stored in, and still combining all of the different classifications for the files into like that decision making. So, we start at the bottom with just having directory structures, folder structures, set up in a way where we can restrict access at that level. And then we work our way up. So if within that folder, for example, there's one team that owns it, maybe there's another team that needs to access some portion of the files, then, we carve out a smaller place within that folder, and we can tailor our DLP policy to monitor that slightly different than it does the broader folder. So if a file is put there, then this team does have access. There's no reason to alert on that. We've actually been taking advantage of Google labels. So labels are feeding through to our DLP tool. And that actually has helped a lot because now we can use the labels. Labels can be anything, but we have them as team names. We have them as sensitivity levels. And then based on that information, we can, again, build more fine-grained policies around the things that it's detecting and what it needs to do.
Wow, super interesting. And how are you applying those labels in Google? Are you relying on employees to apply labels themselves, or do you have any automation there?
A little bit of both. So there's automation to apply the default label, and that label depends on what folder, shared drive or folder you put it in. And then if there are things moving around, that is also automated. So if you move it to another drive, it's got its own label, new label gets applied there. But then there's, if you want to flag something, like the person wants to make this file public, they can put a please review this file for public label on it. IT gets a notification, actually via our DLP tool. So it actually looks at that and it sends an alert in a Slack channel. And then they're able to respond to that alert, look at the file and then move it over wherever it
Incredibly
needs.
interesting. So any file that needs to be shared publicly, an employee attaches, they apply a label manually. The label then triggers an alert to the IT security team, and then you can review that file.
Yeah, and that's just like for the initial, we're doing like a big push. So we've laid out our entire environment, and so we're doing a big push to pull things in. And so right now we're having to like kind of look at everything that's coming in. But yeah, that's the way it works right now. We definitely will have it more automated for future. But yeah.
But I see like the richness in these things. It's interesting. We went through. Okay, so let me go back through a few of those because I wanted to double click on a couple. One was so Google Groups. That would be. Is that like department level groups? Is it other types of groups? What is it?
Yeah, it's department level. And then if we have any other special groups, maybe we have groups for vendors or contractors, then yeah, we have those all grouped off.
Okay, so you've got those set up in Google. You then ultimately pulling that data into your DLP tool and then creating policies using that data.
Yes.
You talked about types of data. So we talked about like data classification. So PHI, PII, maybe sensitive data. And you talked about it being kind of nuanced, so like and/or filters and so on like that. Do you do anything regarding volumes? Do you pull any like volumes, like if a file's got more than a certain amount of data?
We have used that. So, it's not more interesting, but higher risk, I would say, to find a file that's got, 100 plus email address, name, birthday, because that's probably a customer list versus one that has one. So yeah, we've definitely used the volume in those cases where we want to see like where files that contain bulk data, and then look at the other classifiers that alert on that and raise those to the top so we can take a look at them.
This is incredible. This is incredibly interesting to see how you can triage like the most important risks that matter, right? Like it's a complicated world. And you mentioned location, you mentioned owners, you mentioned many different things. So it's a fascinating world in there, these file storage things. It can get kind of complicated. On that, Michael, I just want to ask one. It could be a final question, but we'll see where it goes. So based on your experience, which is obviously incredibly rich and doing these things and learning probably relatively organically, because I don't think anyone's cracked DLP fully in tools like Google Drive and these modern SaaS environments. Can you summarize the critical steps any organization should take to implementing a DLP program that actually works?
Yes, definitely. So starting out, and we've covered it here, but making sure that what is the driver? Why are you doing this? And getting support, getting buy-in, if you need to get support and buy-in for that. So once you've got that squared away, figuring out where your data is stored, what do you need to protect? So have a data classification policy standard documented, and then take that to then figure, okay, what systems is this data stored in, and what tool will integrate with those systems, so that you want a centralized place where you can create these policies across those different tools. So you don't have like an individual tool for each one. Some of the SaaS vendors now have their own DLP built in, but it's very minimum, and you now have to go to like 5 different tools. Instead, you want to just have a centralized place where you can run, get alerts, have that feed into something. So get support, buy-in, classification, figure out where your data is stored, find a solution, review, solutions that can integrate with that data. Once you find it, test it out, got to test to make sure it works for you. Once you test, select your choice, select it, plan to implement it. Once you get it implemented, roll it out to production.
There you go. Step-by-step guide from Mike Ivey. Support and buy-in, visibility and classification, and then a centralized place to create your policies, which you talked to. There's probably not going to be one. There's probably going to be multiple. And then a couple of questions off the back of that. One is that the end game, or is this an evolving strategy? Are you still changing, tweaking the policies, creating new policies? I assume it keeps going.
Oh, yes, it keeps going. Once you get it in, pat yourself on the back, but get ready for the next step. And, just like sneak peek, right now there's a lot of generative AI, like integration vendors that are enabling it in their platforms and wanting to get access to a bunch of data. And so now it's a new thing to monitor for is, okay, we've got this bucket. where you can put public content in, so this AI solution can use it to give us some value. But let's monitor and make sure nothing sensitive goes there. Or even better, let's reject it if it even gets towards the bucket. Just remove it. So things are always changing, and you want your tools, your processes, your strategy to be able to change with that.
Got it. And then the final thing for me, going back to that setup process, so support and buy-in, classification, create policy, centralized placed, and then you added pat yourself on the back. How long roughly would you expect it to take for a company of your sort of size to go from the support that, just getting started all the way through to that pat on the back?
I would say, well, really, it depends on how long it takes for your legal team to review contracts and approve them. And our legal team is awesome. So that is, I'm sure every legal team I've worked with, it takes time.
Yeah.
But, it could take anywhere from a month. Well, no, let me not say a month, a couple of months to get it fully rolled out. And it depends, who are the stakeholders that you have to work with. There are so many additional factors that you do have to consider. But I will say for us, 2 months was reasonable for us, given our size, given the constraints that we had.
That's awesome. Yeah, 2 months. We know that many companies have tried and failed to implement DLP over multiple years. So going from 0 to 1 in 2 months would be a pretty good goal to reach for, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, that's sort of the key content we wanted to go through. I think it's been a super useful session. We've got no questions coming live today, so I think we're good to leave it here, Mike. If you're happy with that,
I'm happy with it. This was good. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, thanks so much for your time today. For the audience, for those that are watching live and on demand later, if you're interested in anything that we talked about, so implementing a modern DLP that actually works, and particularly SaaS environments, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch and we can share more of the types of things that we're seeing from fantastic companies like Modern Health and Modern Security and IT professionals like Mike over here. So Mike, thanks again for your time. It's been awesome speaking, and I'll speak to you again soon.
All right. See you.
All right. See you, Mike. Bye.
Bye.